yield in 2021 was just 1.6 trillion. In 2021, 2022, by June, July to June this year, we're at 2.03. Our budget estimates at 3 trillion. I don't understand where he gets this notion that we're a very wealthy nation. We're really struggling with a huge debt overhang. His proposals about agriculture are really fantastic in an imaginary way. He has got a very agrarian fixation with agriculture. He has no idea about how pastoralism works. His whole fixation about agriculture is throw fertilizer in the soil. So I think this very flippant relationship with facts really undermines the credibility of his candidacy, especially when you want to trust him at an executive level to actually run a state bureaucracy.
And probably that would have been great to ask him had he showed up or had he stayed back and you make a great point. But Dennis, you were talking about
Thanks, Dennis, for the donation.
These two formations, and I don't know how many of your minutes are left, but
just in general terms, I think I get the sense Azimio comes across as more looking at the production side, whereas Kenya Kwanza is looking at the market, much deeper into things of public finance, talking about securitizing pending bills, an infrastructure bank. You know, they've gone into much more detail on the public finance side, so they're a bit specific on that. But I take Wanjiru's point, by the way. I think there's an important point on the governance. They've instrumentalized it, so there's no underpinning philosophy.
Yeah.
It's about instruments. Governance is an instrument, right? There are no underpinning values. I think that's a very important point, especially since, in fact, I wanted to make this point. In the foreword to the manifesto, the Deputy President says he wants to do three things: defend the Constitution, institutionalize our politics, and create jobs. It would be very interesting to see what that means.
Okay, Sheila, you haven't said anything. I don't know what you see in front of us if any of these two people were to get to power. What distinctions do you see, especially from where you sit?
Well, first, I just want to, if I reflect back on the Jubilee Manifesto and why there were some, can I call them, some promises were dead on arrival, was because they really didn't look at the legislative and policy institutional framework. What is the current framework? That's something that I feel a lot of them are not looking at, even as they make certain promises, and that is where a lot of them will struggle. So all the promises, when you look at Kenya Kwanza, Azimio, Agano, some for Jakwe, I don't agree with many of them, but they're good. They're good. I mean, if they're good in an ideal world, but then the practicalities of what is the current framework, both institutional policy and legislative for a country that they're not looking at, particularly when I look at, can I go back to my pet topic on corruption?
Yes, yeah.
And I, like, for instance, like the DP is talking about giving financial and operational independence to institutions like, those responsible for fighting corruption, the judiciary, and so on, which is good, and which, as we have said, has been a problem, that most of these don't have the resources and even the independence, the muscle to be able to operate. But then there are certain challenges that we've seen, and I've not heard them talk about how they will address some of these challenges to their institutional, functional, financial independence of these institutions. Yeah. But for me, primarily as well, I think that when it comes to the issues around corruption, I still feel like they've looked so much on the issues around enforcement, but we're not looking at prevention. And for as long as we're not looking at fighting corruption from a prevention lens, we'll always be fighting.
Okay.
Yeah, and chasing after the money. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how they will actually prevent. And one classic way of starting to prevent corruption is by ensuring that people who have been accused, there I go with my song, people who have been accused of corruption don't get anywhere near public office.
So Hudson, you have only 1 minute, within which we hope someone will arrive. But you have the last word on this one before we take the break to go to the
Maybe allow me to keep speaking until somebody shows up, right?
You have exactly 1 minute.
Yeah, I think what folks have said is, I would agree with much of what everybody said. I think, 6 months ago, there was no galvanizing idea in the political space. I think we now have some ideas that are fairly cogent, they're clear, they're inspirational, they're aspirational. Of course, we're waiting to see budgets and schedules and the first 100 days, first 180 days and so on. But I think the harder questions will be, for example, what do we do with the parastatals that continue to drain the coffers? What are we going to do with the fact that we have huge recurrent expenditure bills in terms of staffing?
Okay.
What are we going to do with this pension that Jubilee had, which was to create infrastructure everywhere?
And I think
so these are some of the challenges.
And we can only get some of those questions, hopefully, inside the hall, because we want to take that break right now. And when we come back in the next couple of minutes, we'll be inside the auditorium to hear what the candidate who's arrived has for us, hoping that the other one will arrive at some point. But here we are, taking that break for the second and final debate of the night.
Linda familia na marafiki dhidi ya magonjwa.
The UHC coverage journey is on. NHIF is working under the guidance of the Ministry of Health in the UHC Step Up, which presents an opportunity to secure Kenyans access to quality health services without suffering